ago, when the Prophet ﷺ passed and people were learning the Quran in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, right? So people were learning the Quran and a lot of people didn't know Arabic. Like they were coming into Islam and they didn't know very good Arabic, but they really just wanted to memorize the Quran. So when they were memorizing, sometimes they were making some mistakes. So Umar radiallahu anhu, one time, there's a story about somebody who, Allah, you know, the Umar was speaking and he was quoting this ayah and he said, "Wa rasuluhu." And somebody said, "What are you talking about?" Because he met a person who says, "I want nothing to do with Allah's messenger." He said, "What do you mean? What do you mean you have nothing to do with Allah's messenger?" Because the ayah says, Allah has nothing to do with those, Allah is separating himself from those who have done shirk. In Makkah, the people who kept worshipping idols, even though the Quran came to them, Allah finally said, Allah is cutting himself off from those who still commit shirk. And then he added, and so does his messenger. Meaning his messenger cuts himself off from those people too. Right? So Allah is cutting himself off, and who else is cutting himself off? Rasul. Okay. So who's doing the act of cutting himself off? Rasul. And because he's doing the act of cutting himself off, he's what? He's Rafa. Okay. But who's he cutting himself off from? The mushrikeen, right? So when you read this incorrectly as Rasulihi, and I'll explain this later when you get a little more advanced, why could it be Rasulihi? The person wrongly memorized Rasulihi. And when they wrongly memorized Rasulihi and somebody was reciting it, a person heard it and said, well, because if you say Rasulihi, you know what the meaning means? The meaning becomes Allah is cutting himself off from the mushrikeen, the people who do shirk, and Allah is also cutting himself off from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So a person was wrongly reciting it, and a person heard it and said, well, if Allah wants nothing to do with his messenger, then I want nothing to do with him either. And Umar asked him, where did you get this from? He said, didn't Allah say, Anna Allaha bari'um minal mushrikeena wa rasulihi? He said, no, he said Rasuluhu. What do you mean? La yuqri'ul Qur'an illa alimun bil lugha. The story says, Umar bin al-Khattab made a declaration, nobody should be teaching someone to read the Quran until they know the language themselves. They should know what they're talking about before they teach somebody else. Right? So this became very serious because one mistake and you're saying crazy things. Right? You're saying just wild things. And so this is the difference between Rasulihi and Rasuluhu.